The sound came at dawn. A single, thunderous bell that shattered the silence of Hive Ardent's morning smog. It wasn't a church bell or a warning siren, it was the call. Everyone in the lower levels knew what it meant. The Imperial Draft had begun, and once your name was chosen, you didn't come back. I remember the air that morning, thick with ash and fear. Mothers clutched their sons, brothers hid in the dark corners of hab blocks, and I just froze. Because deep down, I knew my name would echo next. When the enforcer read it, Jonas Rehn, worker class, second sublevel, my heart fell silent. That was me. I was being taken, not to school, not to work, but to war. To serve the Emperor in the unending nightmare of the 41st millennium. And as the enforcer's red-lensed eyes turned toward me, I remember one thing: the look of my mother. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Serve well, my son, or die quickly." The transport ship smelled like oil, sweat, and fear. Hundreds of us were packed together, miners, factory workers, and street thieves, all suddenly soldiers of the Emperor. We weren't warriors. We were the forgotten. The lowest rungs of the hive, and yet, they told us we were lucky to be chosen to fight for the Imperium of man. Our training began the next day. The drill sergeants, veterans from the Astra Militarum, beat the faith into us with shock batons and words sharper than any blade. "You're not men anymore," one barked, pacing before us. "You are meat for the God Emperor's wars. You'll die screaming on some world you can't pronounce, and that's your honor." They shaved our heads, burned serial numbers into our arms, and stripped us of names. I became number 2871, assigned to the 113th Ardent Regiment, a regiment that, we later learned, had a 90% casualty rate. Days turned to weeks. Sleep turned to pain. But something began to change inside us. When the lost gun was finally placed in my trembling hands, I didn't feel fear anymore, just numbness. And then, one night, we met Sergeant Valen. Unlike the others, Valen didn't shout. He walked slowly between us and said quietly, "You think you've been drafted to die. But death is easy. Living for the Emperor, that's the real battle." He told us about his first war, the day he watched a tyrannid swarm devour his entire squad, and how he kept fighting until his rifle melted in his hands. Something in his voice, the way he believed, planted a strange feeling in me, purpose that we weren't just fodder. We were humanity's last wall against extinction, and maybe that meant something, but that illusion shattered the moment we landed on our first battlefield. The world of Vernis IX was hell made of metal and fire. Orc war bands had overrun the outer colonies, and we, the fresh meat, were thrown into the grinder to hold the line. I still remember the first explosion. The man beside me vanished, leaving nothing but his boots. The air burned, the ground shook, and in that chaos I realized, this wasn't a war of glory. This was survival, and survival meant doing what no sane man should ever do. When I shot my first orc, its blood sprayed across my face, hot, green, and reeking of death. I threw up in my helmet, but the sergeant didn't stop. "Keep shooting, number 2871. For every one of us that dies, 10 more will stand." Hours felt like years. We lost half our company in the first day, and that night, as I sat among the corpses of friends I barely knew, staring into the endless smoke, I whispered the prayer every guardsman learns too late: "Emperor, protect us, because no one else will." Weeks blurred into months. Battles into nightmares. Sleep was a luxury we no longer deserved. When we weren't fighting, we were digging graves or counting rations, but the worst part wasn't the enemy, it was the silence between battles. The waiting. The wondering when your name would be next on the casualty scroll. Sergeant Valen kept us alive. He taught us how to read the land, how to listen to the whispers of approaching orcs, how to find a strange kind of peace in obedience. but even he couldn't fight fate forever. It happened during the siege of Vernis IX's capital fortress. We were ordered to hold a breached wall against impossible odds. Hundreds of greenskins charging, Valen stood tall, lost gun blazing, shouting, "Hold the line! For the Emperor!" He was hit by a slug round the size of a man's fist. It tore half his body apart, but he didn't fall. He turned to me, blood pouring from his mouth, and smiled. "Now, you lead them." For a moment, I forgot the fear. I stood up, grabbed his weapon, and screamed until my throat tore, "For the Emperor! Hold the wall!" We fought like beasts. Not for victory, but for memory. For him, when the dust settled, the orcs were gone. And so was Valen. That night, I burned his tags and whispered, "You were right, Sarge. Death is easy. Living is the real war." Years later, I'm still here. Still fighting. Still wearing the same tattered armor with his name scratched into my plate. The new recruits arrive, wide-eyed, shaking, drafted from some other doomed world. They ask me, "What's it like being drafted into the Imperial Guard?" I tell them the truth. It's pain. It's fear. It's watching everything you love burn and still finding the strength to keep fighting. But it's also the closest thing to honor a man can have in this cursed galaxy. And as they march off to the front lines, I whisper the same words my mother once said to me: "Serve well, or die quickly." Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no peace and no rest, only war. But if you're lucky, if the Emperor wills it, you'll find meaning in the madness, and that, my friends, is what it's like to be drafted in Warhammer 40K.